They thought I was just a senile retiree, but they didn't know that with one phone call, I was about to wipe out my son's future and turn their dream wedding into a federal crime scene. I am Etienne de Montfort. Don't let this gray hair fool you. My ruthlessness hasn't left. It's just better hidden.
The sharp crack of the slap echoed through the hall of Château de Vaux-le-Vicomte, cutting the jazz music like a knife. Marguerite. My wife of 50 years collapsed onto the marble floor, her custom designer glasses shattered, the shards glittering under the chandeliers like glass tears. Standing over her was Chloe, my new daughter-in-law, wearing a silk dress worth 5 years of a normal salary. Her beautiful face was twisted like a demon. "Get out of here, old woman," Chloe roared, her voice sharp as a guillotine before 350 elite guests. "Nobody wants you here. You're ruining my perfect day." The blood began to trickle from my wife's cheek, cut by the diamond ring I paid for 6 months ago. I looked at Paul, my son. He stood there, less than a meter from his mother, but his eyes were down on his expensive shoes. He did nothing. The stench of his cowardice was heavy in the air. In that moment, 31 years of fatherly love evaporated. Instead came a cold, ruthless clarity. I slowly picked up the glass shards, wiped the blood from my wife's face, and pulled out my phone. Only 3 words were spoken: "Execute Directive 0." 30 seconds later, the castle plunged into darkness before industrial halogen lights snapped on, exposing the panicked faces of the elite. The manager's voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a catastrophic payment failure, all services are terminated. You have 15 minutes to leave before police arrive for trespassing." Thierry and Beatrice, Chloe's parents, rushed toward me. Thierry pointed at my face and yelled, "You stupid old man, do you know what you're doing? I'll sue you until you're bankrupt." I looked into his eyes without blinking. He didn't know I held his family's 18 million euro debt. He didn't know his home in Bordeaux was already in my sights. The game has just begun. The moon hung low over the Château de Vaux-le-Vicomte, its 17th century limestone walls glowing under a meticulously designed array of golden floodlights. Inside the grand ballroom, the air was thick with the scent of 5,000 euro lilies and the delicate, effervescent sting of vintage Dom Pérignon. 350 of Europe's most powerful figures, industrialists from Berlin, fashion icons from Milan, and the calcified aristocracy of Paris moved like a sea of silk and wool. At the center of it all stood Etienne de Montfort. At 78, his frame was lean and as unyielding as the skyscrapers he had spent 40 years erecting across the French capital. Beside him was Marguerite, his wife of 50 years. She was 77, draped in bespoke midnight blue silk, carrying herself with a quiet, regal grace that no amount of inherited money could ever truly replicate. A soft, sophisticated jazz ensemble played on a raised dais, the saxophone's trill weaving through the low hum of elite conversation. It was the perfect facade. It was a masterpiece of curated elegance that cost Etienne a staggering 12,000 euros an hour just to maintain. Then the music died. The sound that replaced it was a sharp, sickening crack, the visceral violence of skin meeting skin. It was a sound so sudden it seemed to vacuum the oxygen out of the massive hall. Etienne turned, his heart hammering once against his ribs, to see Marguerite stumbling backward. Her custom designer glasses, which had rested on her face for decades as she sat beside him in high-stakes boardrooms, slipped and shattered against the imported Italian marble floor. The sound of the breaking glass was deafening in the sudden tomb-like silence of the ballroom. Standing over her was Chloe, the new bride. Her face, which had been a mask of angelic perfection for the cameras, was now twisted into a gargoyle's sneer of pure, arrogant disgust. Her massive diamond engagement ring, a stone Etienne had paid for just 6 months ago, had caught Marguerite's cheek, opening a thin, jagged line of deep red blood that began to trickle down her skin. "Get out of here, you ancient relic." Chloe's voice rang out, sharp as a guillotine blade, echoing off the gilded ceilings. "Nobody wants you here. You are a rotting stain on my perfect day. You're an embarrassment to the aesthetic I've spent months building." The 350 guests stood paralyzed. They looked on with a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity, their champagne flutes frozen halfway to their lips. At the VIP tables, Chloe's parents, Thierry and Beatrice, did not rush to intervene. Instead, Beatrice took a slow, methodical sip of her martini, while Thierry whispered something to a guest with a faint, predatory smirk. To them, the Montforts were merely the nouveaux riches bankrolling their daughter's entry back into high society. Etienne's eyes shifted immediately to his son, Paul. Paul was 31, standing less than 3 feet away from the woman who had just assaulted his mother. This was the boy Etienne had carried on his shoulders through the streets of Paris when they had nothing. This was the heir he had shielded from every hardship, the boy he had given the finest education and the most exclusive connections, so he would never have to bow his head to anyone. Paul, Etienne's voice, was a low, dangerous rumble. He waited for the fire. He waited for his son to step between them, to demand an apology, to throw this interloper out into the night. But Paul did absolutely nothing. He froze. He stared down at his 20,000 euro leather shoes, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his crystal flute. The stench of his cowardice was a physical weight in the air. Through his pathetic, terrified silence, Paul had chosen his side. He had chosen the illusion of acceptance from a bankrupt, arrogant family over the mother who had kissed his bruised knees as a child. In that single, frozen moment, 28 years of unconditional paternal love evaporated into a cold, calculating clarity. Paul was no longer an heir, he was an accomplice. Etienne did not shout. Men who build empires from concrete and steel do not throw tantrums. He set his cider glass down on a passing waiter's tray with hands that were as steady as stone. He walked slowly across the marble floor, the crowd parting for him like the Red Sea. He knelt down, his old joints aching, right in front of Chloe's expensive white silk shoes. With agonizing precision, he picked up the broken shards of Marguerite's glasses so no one would step on them. He pulled a clean silk handkerchief from his pocket and gently pressed it to his wife's bleeding cheek. Marguerite looked at him. Her eyes were not filled with tears. They were filled with a shared, silent understanding. They had a contingency plan for their corporate assets, and years ago they had made one for the family trust. It was a plan designed to sever the rot if the branch ever became infected. She nodded once, an unbreakable agreement between partners. The gloves were off. Etienne stood to his full height, looking directly at Chloe. She puffed out her chest, smirking, waiting for him to yell so she could play the fragile victim for her high society friends. She wanted him to cause a scene so security could throw him out of his own event. Etienne gave her nothing. His face was a mask of granite. He glanced at Paul, whose eyes darted away in utter shame. Paul was already a ghost to him, a stranger in a suit Etienne had paid for. Etienne reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He dialed a private, encrypted number that went straight to his lead wealth manager. It rang only once. "Execute Directive 0, Etienne said into the receiver, his voice devoid of warmth or hesitation. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Chloe let out a condescending, trilling laugh. "What was that, Etienne?" "Ordering your taxi." "Good. Don't let the door hit your ancient asses on the way out." Her laugh died in her throat 3 seconds later. A heavy, mechanical clunk echoed loudly through the massive hall. The towering oak double doors leading out of the grand ballroom slammed shut, and the electronic deadbolts hissed as they locked from the outside. The green exit signs above the doors flickered and turned a blood red. A wave of panic rippled through the guests. Chloe spun around, her jaw dropping. "What is this? Paul, fix this." Then the world ended. The grand chandeliers, which had bathed the room in a soft, romantic gold, suddenly snapped off, plunging the 350 elite guests into absolute, terrifying darkness. The romantic jazz music was cut off mid-note, leaving a sickening mechanical hum in the air. 5 seconds passed, 5 seconds of screams and the rustle of designer gowns in the dark. Then the emergency lights kicked on. They were not the warm lights of high society. They were harsh, blinding, industrial halogen beams, the kind of lights used in prison courtyards or warehouse loading docks. They cast ugly, sharp shadows across the faces of the socialites, making their expensive makeup look like cheap grease paint and their panicked expressions look grotesque. The illusion of the perfect wedding was shattered. It was replaced by the cold, hard reality of a lockdown. The transition from a fairy tale wedding to a high-security lockdown was instantaneous and violent, as the industrial halogen beams hummed with a nauseating electrical buzz. The 350 elite guests of Paris stood frozen, their expensive silhouettes casting long, jagged shadows across the marble. The illusion of high society had been stripped away, replaced by the cold, sterile reality of a warehouse loading dock. Marcus, my venue manager, didn't flinch as the room began to simmer with panic. He tapped the microphone, a sound that thudded through the subwoofers like a heartbeat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus's voice was as flat as a grave marker. "Due to an instant and catastrophic payment failure, all services for this event have been legally terminated. The catering staff, the musicians, and the hospitality crew are now off the clock. This private property is now officially closed." He paused, letting the silence twist like a knife. "You have exactly 15 minutes to evacuate the premises before the local authorities arrive to arrest anyone remaining for criminal trespassing. Please proceed to the exits in an orderly fashion." The room exploded. Women in 5-figure silk gowns began to shriek, and men in bespoke tuxedos shouted at the waiters demanding their champagne. But the staff stood like statues, their faces blank. The party was dead. Through the fleeing crowd, 2 figures pushed forward with a sense of violent entitlement. Thierry and Beatrice de Villiers, Chloe's parents. Thierry's face was a deep, pulsating shade of crimson, veins bulging in his neck like he was about to stroke out. "Listen to me, you old fool," Thierry spat, shoving a manicured finger inches from my face. "I don't know what kind of cheap stunt you think you're pulling, but I will personally see to it that you are ruined. You are embarrassing my family. I know the Minister of Justice. I will drag you through the courts until you are living on the street." Beatrice joined in, her voice a high-pitched screech that cut through the chaos. "Fix this, right now. Go tell that manager to turn the lights back on. You people are always ruining everything with your dramatic outbursts. Tell your wife to stop crying and wash her face so we can get on with the evening. You people." The words hung in the air. Dripping with generations of unearned arrogance, they saw an old man who had worked with his hands, a nouveau's riches contractor who had gotten lucky. They had no idea that Thierry was currently drowning in 18 million euros of corporate debt just to keep up this pathetic facade. They were screaming at the man who secretly held the mortgage to their ancestral home. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I simply looked through Thierry as if he were made of glass. I turned my back on the most powerful man in Bordeaux without uttering a single word. I placed my arm around Marguerite's waist. She was trembling, but her head was held high. We walked toward the heavy oak doors, which were now unlocked to let the panicked herd of guests escape into the night. As we walked, I could hear Thierry screaming behind me that I was a coward. He was calling the police, reporting me for fraud. Let him call them, I whispered to Marguerite. The trap is already set. The drive away from the chateau was silent, save for the rain drumming against the tinted windows of my town car. I told my driver to skip the estate and head directly to the American Hospital of Paris in Neuilly. Marguerite looked at me, her eyes tired but knowing. We weren't going there for a bandage, we were going there to build a weapon. In France, striking a 77-year-old woman isn't just a battery, it is elder abuse, a felony. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room were a sharp contrast to the chateau. The nurses took us to a private room immediately when they saw the blood on Marguerite's face. A young doctor cleaned the wound, and I made sure he didn't sugarcoat the chart. I told him exactly who did it. Chloe de Villiers. I stood in the corner, watching as a forensic nurse took high-resolution photographs of the laceration on Marguerite's cheek, cut deep by the diamond ring I had paid for. Every flash of the camera was another nail in Chloe's coffin. I was locking down the evidence before her bankrupt father could hire a lawyer to spin a lie. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. It was Paul. I stepped into the hallway and answered. I didn't say hello, I just listened to the panic. Paul was at Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport, standing at the Air France terminal. He and Chloe were supposed to be boarding a flight for a 3-week honeymoon in Bora Bora, a trip that cost more than most people earn in a year, and a trip I had funded entirely. Dad, what is going on? Paul was frantic, his voice cracking. We just tried to enter the VIP lounge, and the attendant cut my membership card in half right in front of us. He said the account is dead. He told me they were at the ticketing counter, and the agent had informed them that their first-class tickets had been cancelled and the reservation wiped from the system. He was throwing a tantrum in the middle of the busiest airport in the world. He said Chloe was crying and people were staring. He demanded, I call the airline to fix the glitch. There is no glitch, Paul, I said, my voice devoid of any paternal warmth. I personally cancelled the flights while we were in the car to the hospital. The silence on the other end was absolute. Then he started to stammer, asking why I would do such a thing on his wedding night. Because the black card in your wallet is dead, I told him. The account is permanently closed. Your trust fund is frozen. Your access to every family account has been revoked. The moment you stood by and watched that spoiled girl assault your mother, you ceased to be a part of this family. And people who are not part of my family do not spend my money. His shock turned into a violent, desperate rage. He started yelling again, but this time his voice was cracking. He told me I was being unreasonable and crazy over a stupid argument. He actually called the unprovoked assault on his mother a stupid argument. He said I was ruining his life and humiliating his wife. He threatened me, telling me that he did not need my money anyway. He screamed that they would just get an Uber and go back to his luxury penthouse in Paris to figure things out in the morning. He told me I would regret this when they cut me out of their lives forever. I did not argue with him. I did not try to teach him a lesson or explain the depth of my disappointment. He was far beyond saving. So, I gave him the only response his disrespect warranted. Total and absolute silence. I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call right in the middle of his angry ranting. I blocked his number immediately, let him scream into the void. As we drove home to our estate, I pulled out my tablet to check the security network. Paul was arrogant and stupid, but he was also predictable. Just as he had threatened, he and Chloe had taken a ride share from the airport straight to the high-rise where his penthouse was located. The high-definition feed showed them stepping out of the elevator. They looked exhausted, wet from the rain, and thoroughly miserable. Chloe was clutching her ruined wedding dress, mascara running down her face. Paul marched up to the sleek black door and placed his thumb on the biometric scanner. The circular light didn't turn green. It flashed a bright, angry red. Access denied. He tried again. Beep red. He tried his backup code. Beep red. I sat in the back of my car, watching my son finally realize the terrible truth as the screen flashed Disacatic lock out. He was locked out of his home, locked out of his wealth, and locked out of his future. The real nightmare had only just begun. The clock in my private study struck 2 a.m., but sleep was a luxury I had permanently discarded. I sat in the high-backed leather chair, the only light in the room emanating from the cold blue glow of my tablet. The silence of the Montfort estate was heavy, but the digital world outside was screaming. Chloe had made her move. I watched the screen as the view count on her video climbed past 3 million. She was sitting on the edge of a cheap, stained motel bed, a calculated backdrop designed to scream homeless victims. Her designer makeup was artfully smudged to simulate tears, and her hair was disheveled just enough to look like she'd been through a struggle. I never thought my wedding night would end in a nightmare, she sobbed into the camera, her voice trembling with a rehearsed fragility. I was cornered in the bridal suite. Marguerite, she's always hated me. She attacked me, screaming that I wasn't good enough for their bloodline. I only struck back to save my own life. I am terrified. Etienne has hired armed men to hunt us down. Please, I just wanted to love Paul. The comment section was a cesspool of vitriol. Lock that old hag up, one read. The Montforts are nothing but violent thugs with money, read another. They used every coded and hateful slur in the book to demonize Marguerite. They didn't want the truth. They wanted the spectacle of a fallen dynasty. But the final dagger didn't come from Chloe. It came from the pinned comment at the top, written from a verified account. Paul Montfort, I stand by my wife. Nobody should ever have to endure the abuse Chloe suffered tonight. My mother has lost her mind, and my father is a tyrant. We are done with them. I stared at those words until they burned into my retinas. In that exact moment, the son I had raised died to me. He wasn't a victim of Chloe's manipulation. He was an active enemy participating in the public lynching of his own mother's character. You've chosen your side, Paul, I whispered into the dark. Now let's see if you can afford the bill. I closed the social media app and opened a secure, encrypted folder labeled Vaux le Vicomte Bridal Suite 4K. Chloe thought she was a master of the game. She thought she was playing checkers, but I had built the entire chessboard. My venues weren't just luxury estates. They were fortresses equipped with military-grade surveillance that captured every whisper in 4K resolution. I pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the bridal suite 1 hour before the ceremony. Chloe was sitting at the mahogany vanity, but she wasn't praying or reflecting on her vows. She was holding a tightly rolled €100 bill to her nose, snorting a thick line of cocaine off the glass surface. Her bridesmaids were giggling, but Chloe's voice was the loudest, sharp, cold, and predatory. You think I actually like that pathetic, obedient dog? Chloe laughed, dabbing her nose. She was referring to Paul. He's a stupid meal ticket. I've already had my lawyer find the loophole in the trust. I only have to endure being Madame Montfort for exactly 12 months. Once the divorce clause triggers, I'm walking away with half of that €60 million fund. She looked at her reflection, a mask of pure, unadulterated greed. His parents are gullible fools. They're so desperate for the de Villa's name to legitimize their concrete money that they'd hand me the keys to the vault just for a smile. I'll buy us all a villa in Ibiza with their blood money before the first anniversary. The footage then showed Marguerite entering the room, the velvet box containing the family heirloom in her hands. The transition in Chloe's face was terrifying. The predator didn't hide, it attacked. The video caught the exact moment Chloe realized her payday was slipping away and decided to strike first to spin the narrative. I paused the frame on Chloe's face, the rolled bill still in her hand, the white powder on the table. It was a slam-dunk felony conviction. "You wanted a war, Chloe," I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. "But you forgot who poured the foundation of your world." 3:30 a.m. Place de l'Alma, Paris. The rain was a torrential downpour, turning the streets of Paris into a dark, slick labyrinth. A battered, dented ride-share car pulled up to the curb of the ultra-modern high-rise overlooking the Seine. Paul stepped out, his €20,000 tuxedo now a soaked, shapeless rag. He held the door for Chloe, who was clutching her ruined silk gown, her mascara running down her face like black ink. They looked like drowned rats, a far cry from the royalty they had pretended to be 5 hours ago. "This is ridiculous," Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking over the thunder. "Why didn't the driver take us to the VIP entrance?" "The corporate account was flagged, Chloe." "Just getting inside," Paul snapped, his nerves frayed to the breaking point. "Once we're in the penthouse, I'll call the lawyers. My father is just throwing a tantrum. He'll fold. He always folds." They marched into the lobby, ignoring the suspicious look from the night concierge. They reached the private elevator, the one that required a biometric thumbprint and a facial scan. Paul stepped up to the sleek black panel. He pressed his thumb to the glass pad. He expected the familiar chime and the welcoming green light of his multi-million-euro sanctuary. A sharp, jarring tone echoed in the quiet lobby. The circular light around the scanner didn't turn green. It flashed a bright, angry, blood red. Paul frowned, wiping the rain from his thumb. Stupid sensor. He tried again. He tried his index finger. Red. "Paul, what are you doing?" "Open the damn door," Chloe hissed, her eyes darting around the lobby. "I'm trying," Paul yelled. He began frantically punching his emergency backup code into the glowing keypad. The screen didn't open the door. Instead, bold white letters flashed across the display, reflected in Paul's wide, terrified eyes. Paul frozen. The blood drained from his face until he was as pale as the marble floor. "Property owner," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling with a new kind of fear. "Paul, this is your penthouse. Your name is on the deed." Paul's hand began to shake so violently he dropped his phone. "No," he stammered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow to the stomach. It's held by the Montfort real estate portfolio. My father, he's the primary trustee." At that moment, the biometric scanner flashed red one last time, and the elevator power hummed and then died, leaving them in the dim emergency lighting of the lobby. Paul turned his head slowly to look at his wife, the woman he had just betrayed his mother for. Chloe wasn't looking at him with love or comfort. She was looking at him with a cold, predatory disgust, the same look she had given the old woman on the dance floor. "You told me you were a billionaire, Paul," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "You told me the trust was yours. It will be. He's just made you a beggar," Chloe interrupted, her eyes narrowing into dark slits of pure hatred. "You're not a prince. You're just an obedient lapdog who just got kicked out of the house." The high society princess was gone. The mask had fallen, and underneath was a woman who realized she had just legally tied herself to a man with zero financial power. Standing in the rain-drenched lobby, Paul Montfort finally realized the absolute truth. He was locked out of his wealth, locked out of his home, and permanently exiled from the empire his father had built. The nightmare hadn't just begun. It was already over, and he had lost everything before the sun even rose. The morning sun over the 16th arrondissement of Paris was cold, glinting off the glass and steel of the Montfort Tower. Inside the 50th floor conference room, the atmosphere was even colder. I sat at the head of a massive mahogany table, the city's skyline sprawling behind me like a conquered map. The heavy glass doors swung open, and the silence was punctuated by the sharp, rhythmic click of designer heels. Chloe marched in, looking like a woman who had already won. She had traded her ruined wedding dress for a bespoke white suit, her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Behind her trailed Paul, looking small and defeated, and a man who smelled of too much cologne and desperation, their high-profile litigator. They were 15 minutes late, a pathetic power play. "Let's skip the pleasantries. Etienne." Chloe's lawyer barked, slamming a leather briefcase onto the polished wood. "My client is traumatized. You've locked her out of her home, frozen her accounts, and harassed her family. We have a €10 million lawsuit drafted and a media tour ready to burn your reputation to the ground unless you settle. Right, now." Chloe leaned back, a predatory smirk playing on her lips. She thought her viral video, the one where she played the fragile victim, was her ultimate weapon. She thought she held the leash to the Montfort fortune. "I want the €60 million trust fund unlocked," Chloe hissed, her voice dripping with unearned arrogance. "I want 10 million in tax-free cash for my suffering, and the rest transferred to a joint account for me and Paul. You have 5 minutes to sign, or the world finds out exactly what kind of monster you are." I didn't blink. I didn't even look at her. I turned to my lead counsel, Maître Lefebvre. He was a man who possessed the warmth of a great white shark and the precision of a guillotine. "Maître," I said quietly, "show them the reality of their situation." Lefebvre slid a single, thin manila folder across the table. It didn't contain a settlement offer. It contained a death warrant for their ambitions. "Madame de Montfort, if I can even call you that," Lefebvre began, his voice like dry parchment, "you are operating under a catastrophic delusion. You married a man based on a fundamental misunderstanding of wealth architecture. You see, Paul does not own a trust fund. He is merely a discretionary beneficiary." The color began to drain from Paul's face. He knew what was coming. Every euro Paul has ever spent was granted purely at the discretion of the trustees, Etienne and Marguerite. Lefebvre continued, his eyes locking onto Chloe's. "He is nothing more than a peasant who was allowed to sleep in the castle, and as of midnight on your wedding night, the castle doors are permanently locked." Chloe slammed her hand on the table, her composure fracturing. "That's a lie. We're married. Community property laws." "Community property laws do not apply to a beneficiary who has just triggered the ironclad clause," Lefebvre interrupted, flipping the document to Section 8, the morality clause. He read the words with a chilling steadiness. "Any physical or psychological harm inflicted upon the grantors by a beneficiary or their spouse results in instantaneous and permanent disinheritance. No grace period, no arbitration. The moment you struck Marguerite de Montfort in front of 350 witnesses, you didn't just break her glasses, you shattered Paul's future into a billion pieces." Lefebvre dropped the official medical report from the American Hospital of Paris onto the table. Permanent hearing loss, ruptured eardrum, felony elder abuse. The legal requirements for the morality clause have been met flawlessly. Paul is penniless, and by extension, so are you. The silence in the room was suffocating. Chloe turned to Paul, her eyes narrowing into dark slits of pure hatred. "You told me it was yours. You told me you were a billionaire." Paul couldn't even meet her gaze. He was a ghost in a suit I had paid for. But the execution wasn't over. I looked toward the back of the room as the doors opened again. Thierry de Villas, Chloe's father, walked in. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His skin was grey, and his hands were shaking so violently he had to tuck them into his pockets. "Thierry," I said, my voice echoing in the vast room, "I believe you were planning to sue me, to use your old money connections to ruin me." Thierry didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he looked at me with hollow, defeated eyes. "I had my shadow firm look into your logistics company in Bordeaux, Thierry," I said, leaning forward. "You're drowning in 18 million euros of toxic debt. You've been running a bankrupt mirage for 5 years. praying for this marriage to bail you out. Well, I have some news for you. I didn't just watch your daughter marry my son. I bought your entire reality. I laid out the bank records. I had purchased every single one of his failing loans. I owned his company. I owned his fleet of trucks, and I owned the deed to his ancestral mansion in Bordeaux. I'm calling in the full 18 million, Thierry. You have 48 hours to wire the cash, or I seize everything. Your wife will be on the street, and your family name will be a footnote in a bankruptcy court, I stated with cold finality. Thierry collapsed into a chair, his prestigious mask crumbling into dust. He looked at his daughter, then at the legal documents, and then at me. The predator had become the prey. "What do you want?" Thierry whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, not the house, not the company." "The price of your survival is simple, Thierry," I said. "I want a full, public confession from your daughter. I want a video posted to her social media admitting she lied about the assault, admitting she was using cocaine, and admitting she married Paul solely for the money." I dropped a second stack of papers on the table, a total annulment and a waiver of all marital rights. She signs these. She walks away with exactly what she brought into this family. Nothing. Do this, and I restructure your debt. Refuse, and I wipe the de Villiers' name off the map before the sun goes down. The internal battle on Thierry's face lasted exactly 10 seconds. Old money greed is a cancer that destroys loyalty. Thierry. Dad. Chloe's voice was high-pitched, filled with a new, raw terror. "You can't be serious. You're going to let him do this to me." Thierry didn't look at her. He reached out with a trembling hand and grabbed the annulment papers, pulling them toward him like a lifeline. "Shut up, Chloe," Thierry hissed, his voice dripping with venomous self-preservation. "You've ruined us with your arrogance. You've played your hand and lost. Now, you're going to sign those papers, or so help me God, I will throw you to the wolves myself. You're betraying me. For money," Chloe shrieked, standing up and lunging toward her father. Thierry stood his ground, his face twisted in disgust. "I'm saving what's left. You're a liability, Chloe. You always have been. You're on your own." He turned to me, clutching the documents to his chest. "The video will be up by noon. The papers will be delivered to your office by the end of the day. Just stay away from my company." Thierry turned and walked out of the room, leaving his daughter standing in the center of my empire, completely alone. Paul followed him out like a lost dog, not even casting a glance back at the woman he had just betrayed his mother for. Chloe stood there, her mouth hanging open, her perfect world reduced to a cold glass room and a mounting list of felony charges. The viral video was being deleted. Her father had abandoned her. Her husband was a pauper. "This isn't over, Etienne," she screamed, her voice cracking as the security team stepped forward to escort her out. "I'll kill you. I'll burn this whole building down." I didn't answer. I just watched her through the glass as the elevator doors closed. The cancer had been cut out. The execution was complete. Now, it was time to let the law handle the rest. The afternoon sun at the St. Cloud Golf Club was glorious, casting long, golden shadows across the emerald fairways where the elite of Paris gathered to whisper about the latest scandals. At the center of a shaded terrace, Chloe sat surrounded by her high society sycophants. She was holding court, sipping a vintage mimosa, and painting a picture of herself as the ultimate survivor of the barbaric Montfort family. "I've filed the papers," she boasted, her voice ringing with a false, predatory confidence. "Etienne thinks his concrete money makes him untouchable, but the courts will strip him bare. That old woman attacked me, and I'll make sure she spends her final years in a civil suit that never ends." Her friends gasped in rehearsed sympathy, but the air suddenly turned cold. The rhythmic clinking of silverware stopped. Two plainclothes detectives, their faces like flint, marched through the clubhouse doors. They didn't ask for permission. They walked with the heavy, undeniable authority of the law. Chloe stood up, a triumphant smirk crossing her face. She assumed they were there to tell her Etienne had been taken into custody. She extended a manicured hand. "Is it done, detective? Is the old man in a cell?" The lead detective didn't take her hand. He pulled a heavy pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clack silenced the entire terrace. "Chloe de Villiers," he announced, his voice booming so every aristocrat in the club could hear. "You are under arrest for felony elder abuse, perjury, and possession of a Schedule I narcotic." The smirk died. Her face turned a sickly, ashen grey. "You've made a mistake. My father is." "Your father is a fugitive," the detective interrupted, "and we've already reviewed the 4K footage from the bridal suite. We saw the cocaine, Chloe. We heard you bragging about the fraud, and we watched you ritualize your assault on an elderly woman." As the steel ratcheted shut around her wrists, Chloe lost all pretense of elegance. She began to shriek, a guttural, feral sound that echoed off the clubhouse walls. She thrashed and kicked, screaming for her father to save her, but Thierry and Beatrice de Villiers were gone. They had fled the country in the dead of night to outrun federal arrest warrants for bankruptcy fraud and tax evasion that Etienne had personally delivered to the authorities. Chloe was dragged through the center of the terrace, her designer heels scraping against the stone, as her friends physically recoiled from her, as if she were a plague victim. 3 months later, the courtroom in the heart of Paris felt like a tomb. Chloe sat at the defense table, but she was no longer the princess of the de Villiers clan. She was thin, pale, and trembling. She was represented by a tired public defender because she no longer had a single euro to her name. The judge, a man with zero tolerance for the arrogance of the elite, did not mince words. "You tried to weaponize the police against an innocent woman to secure a payday. You struck a 77-year-old mother and permanently damaged her hearing, then lied about it under oath." The gavel struck like a thunderclap. 3 years in the state penitentiary. No parole. Chloe collapsed. She looked back at the gallery, searching for Paul, searching for her parents. But the benches were empty. She had spent her life treating people as disposable assets, and now she was the one being thrown away. Etienne de Montfort sat on the wide porch of his estate, a glass of cold iced tea in his hand. Beside him, Marguerite was reading, the sunlight catching the soft white of the bandage she no longer needed. They had found a peace that money couldn't buy, the peace of a home where the rot had been permanently excised. The rumble of a heavy diesel engine broke the silence. A battered, sweat-stained delivery truck pulled up to the iron gates. A man stepped out, dressed in a faded brown uniform, his boots covered in the dust of a 10-hour shift. It was Paul. He didn't have his Italian sports car. He didn't have his black corporate credit card. He had a large, heavy box in his arms. He walked up the driveway, his muscles straining under the weight of the package. He was no longer the pampered prince. He was a man learning the brutal, honest reality of a day's work. Paul stopped at the stone pillar and looked up at the security camera. He knew his father was watching. He didn't beg. He didn't fall to his knees. He simply gave a single, slow, respectful nod, an acknowledgement of the man who had finally forced him to grow up. Etienne watched him drive away to finish his route. He didn't open the gates, but a quiet smile spread across his face. "He's finally learning the value of $1, Etienne whispered. "Justice has been served." The de Villiers mansion in Bordeaux was no longer a monument to old money arrogance. Etienne had donated the entire estate to a non-profit organization. The grand ballroom where Chloe had plotted her theft was now a state-of-the-art computer lab for underprivileged youth. The gardens were now a community greenhouse. The Montfort fortune was no longer destined for ungrateful heirs. It was moved into a permanent foundation to fund scholarships and small business loans for those who actually understood the meaning of hard work. Blood might dictate who you are related to, but unwavering loyalty dictates who your family is. When you stop funding your own disrespect, you do not lose a family. You simply take out the trash and reclaim your dignity. Thank you for following this story. If you believe that respect must be earned and disrespect must be punished, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful life stories.
That girl is a runner, she was born to get away. Hear that two-tone humming, headed out to the highway. I should have seen it coming, through the years left in the dust.